The Marvels is the latest MCU film, so today let's rank all 33 films from worst to best. Hey everybody, my name is Justin here. I try to watch everything that hits theaters and on streaming services. If you guys are like me, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below and click that bell notification for more up and coming content. Leave your list down below. How would you rank every single MCU film from worst to best? I will not be including the shows on Disney Plus or any of the specials, strictly just the movies. Coming in last place is Thor: The Dark World. This is a good looking film. Everything about it just looks very nice. The costume designs are good. Overall look and color of it's fine, but it's a very forgettable movie.
I forgot.
There's not a lot at stake when it comes to our villain within here. The performances are just kind of average at best. There's no threat, no suspense when it comes to our story. It easily is one of the most forgettable MCU films, despite it looking really good. Everything's nice and polished together, but it's a film that doesn't deliver on the action or the thrills of having Loki and Thor return and having a villain that could test them. It's all pretty bad. Coming in at number 32 is Iron Man 2. This sequel to Iron Man does not deliver the same emotional beat that the first Iron Man does. It turns into a more corny comedic style for Iron Man. You don't take the character too seriously compared to that first film. The action itself also is not as entertaining. The villain is really weak. Just the way that this film was structured and the way that they delivered some of the jokes in here. I understand Jon Favreau's frustration when he wanted a few extra years to get this film out and really develop a nice script for it, but they wanted 2 years to have this film after the success of that first Iron Man film and setting up the Avengers. I understand that timeline, but this film definitely does feel weak compared to that first Iron Man film. The exploration of the character, a lot of the bad jokes, the action, all of it feels like it's missing something.
This is not funny! It's not funny!
Coming at number 31 is The Eternals. The Eternals is like Thor: The Dark World. It looks very good. The CGI, the costumes, the look overall of the Eternals is very impressive. But the story itself is not impressive.
It's bad, real bad.
There's so much that this film takes on in terms of the characters and their development and trying to set up future films as well, that it feels that the pacing for it moves really quick and you don't get to have any connection, any deep connection with some of the characters. They're characters that I just immediately forget about after watching this movie. And I've seen it a few times and they're not ones that I want to revisit, not characters I really even care about. And it's disappointing for a film that could be very different than your typical MCU film, but it ended up being one of the most average, boring MCU films to date. Coming at number 30 is Iron Man 3. The setup for our villain to this day really just frustrates me because of the initial setup is very strong. There is a really suspenseful feel to it in the beginning of the movie, and they kind of just rip that away from us and becomes something completely different and not very strong. But I do like some of the direction in here from Shane Black and some of the action in here and the internal struggle that Iron Man is going through. It's nicely explored within this film, but to this day, one of the more frustrating MCU films for me and a big letdown. Coming in at number 29 is The Incredible Hulk. I do like some of the action in here with the Abomination and the Incredible Hulk. Edward Norton is just fine as Bruce Banner, not something that was truly memorable. And so going off of this film, it's very different from your typical MCU film, just the way that it looks. It is one that feels like it just sticks out from the rest of the MCU movies. And a lot of the film feels very dull. The exploration of Bruce Banner and his relationship with other characters, it's not something I'm just that absolute crazy about. I do like the end with some of the action, but that's just about it for this movie. Coming in at number 28 is Thor. I was eagerly waiting the arrival of Thor when the MCU started. I remember I was in high school, very excited for Chris Hemsworth as this character and Tom Hiddleston as Loki. There's the right elements to it, and bringing Kenneth Branagh into this movie directed some good films along the way. And so I was very curious about this movie. There are some elements that really do work. When you are on Asgard and looking at the relationship between the brothers, that is when the film truly does shine. And then when you get to Earth, it feels like a completely different film, and they just do not match. They do not work together. And that fish out of water style to it, the comedic moments do not work. The supporting characters are pretty pointless. And so having a nice setup for it that looks absolutely amazing, and Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth are perfectly portraying these characters, and then you get Earth scenes, and that is when everything just comes to a halt and is not as good as your previous setup for Thor. Coming at number 27 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This is another film that I was hugely disappointed by because of the setup for the first Guardians, and this film takes what made those characters work and some of those relationships once again, but does not deliver with an intriguing story. An emotional story that could be there between Star-Lord and his father. It's not explored as deep as it could be. There's no tense moments. There's no suspense to some of these storylines. So you just feel like you're getting a story that could be explored better, have a better structure, a better script to this movie. And it's relying solely on the comedic moments and the characters. And they are thrown into this plot that feels very thin and could be something just much bigger and more emotional for a lot of our characters. And there are some decent scenes in here, some good build up for like Yondu. That was very satisfying, but when you look at the overall story, I did find it to be very weak. Coming in number 26 is Avengers Age of Ultron. This is the perfect example of trying to do too much, take on a lot more, realizing that the first Avengers film was very successful and people found it to be very entertaining. So you have to do something even bigger. And a lot of this film does work, but a lot of it also feels like it is setting up a lot more when you have those dreamlike sequences and that are setting up future films. You have Scarlet Witch, Vision, Quicksilver. There's a lot that this film does take on that really just kind of takes away from the development of Ultron, our villain, in here. The group dynamics that do work, and the action is a lot of fun. It's a nicely directed movie, but the film tries to take on too much, and it makes a lot of the smaller parts, makes a lot of the smaller parts of this movie feel disconnected from the overall story of Age of Ultron. So this is one of the more disappointing films after it being a huge film. The Avengers films are those big movies that need to be successful and bring all of the characters together. Most of the Avengers films are successful, but I would consider Age of Ultron to be quite disappointing.
You blew it! You had it all and you blew it!
Coming in number 25 is Black Widow. This came way too late, and you already had that emotional connection to Black Widow. Her sacrifice was very earned, very personal, and like that within Endgame, but with exploring her later down the road, you just don't feel that same connection to the character after you know what happened to her in Endgame. And part of it does feel like a setup for Florence Pugh's character, which I really do like. If this movie came out much earlier, I think it would be a much better film. But since they're trying to set up future installments and future characters and team-ups, it takes away from that development of Black Widow and exploring her past. Get the family dynamics in here. It added for some hilarious moments within here. The villain in here is truly forgettable. One of the worst villains in the MCU, which easily could be one of the best. So Black Widow ended up being a film that came way too late. The emotions are not earned within this film, and it could be explored a lot earlier to have a more deeper connection to this character. Coming at number 24 is Captain Marvel. I initially liked this film when it was released, but it is one that starts to dip lower and lower on the list, mostly due to the performance and exploration of Captain Marvel. She immediately comes into the film, is very cocky, and the initial development for that character doesn't feel earned. It doesn't feel like it's a natural progression of this character. And I do like Brie Larson as an actress, and I think she gives a decent performance in here. Just the way that the character was written, they immediately came off as she's way too strong, and there wasn't that chance for that natural progression of this character. On top of that, the villains were pretty weak. There's a lot of forgettable sequences. But Goose, Samuel Jackson, I like some of the supporting characters within this movie. Just the way that they placed her into the MCU, I think they could have did something a little bit differently and explore her further down the road. They waited way too long for a sequel, and a lot of disconnection from that character throughout the years, and it's hard to really feel invested in Captain Marvel's storyline. Coming in number 23 is Doctor Strange. This is a really good looking film, and I like Doctor Strange as a character, and the wizard aspect, the magic to it, it all looks really good. The story itself is not as good. The development of Doctor Strange, the villain, all of that, I really did not care much for. I was so invested in the magic behind it all, and seeing how the powers of Doctor Strange were growing. That is something I do find to be very interesting. And still to this day, with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and him in the Avengers films, it's a character I still really do like. And I've grown to love this character over the years. But this first film had a hard time getting started. It felt very similar to Iron Man, and I just wasn't involved so much with the story and the villain, more involved with the magic and it being something different in the MCU. Coming in number 22 is The Marvels, the latest MCU film. I thought was a lot of fun. There are parts that do work, parts that I really did not care much about. It didn't know what to do with the Kree and the Skrull and those storylines. It felt like a lot of it felt very underdeveloped. It being the shortest MCU film, you felt like the pacing for it was moving quick, and certain transitions felt they weren't completed. I did like the chemistry between Monica Rambeau and Kamala Khan and Carol Danvers, and connecting it to Miss Marvel and WandaVision, I thought was very successful. Had it for a lot of entertaining moments, but just overall the story was very thin. Villain, I feel like will be a villain that I will easily forget about down the road. I just saw the movie just a couple of days ago, so I do remember the villain now, but you asked me in a few months, I probably would forget about it. But it's got a nice style to it. It's very energetic, but just the story and the pacing to it is very off. Coming in number 21 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Nowhere near as good as the first Ant-Man. I do like most of the film, but it's just one that it's kind of boring at times. I like the Wasp, I like Ant-Man, and I like Ghost in here as a villain. There's not a lot in here that makes it that memorable. I mean, Ant-Man and Wasp, they have good chemistry in here. There's some fun sequences of shrinking in size or getting really big. They utilize that well within this movie, but it's one of those films that just kind of goes along, doesn't really test itself, doesn't really have these emotional connections to the characters, doesn't do anything groundbreaking to make it stand out within the MCU. And when this film did come out, we were like in this hot streak with the MCU, and I feel like this film just kind of came and gone, and that was about it. Coming in number 20 is Spider-Man Far From Home. I do like Jake Gyllenhaal in here as Mysterio. Very good. Very strong performance from Jake Gyllenhaal. I was so happy to have him within this film. This film just takes on too many bad jokes. Too many jokes in here that are very stupid. The night monkey scene and the one on the bus with the drone and him in his underwear getting the suit. There's so many just very cringy jokes. This film doesn't do a great job of developing Peter Parker as a high school student. There are a lot of huge focus on like having Samuel Jackson in here and a big villain, and a very limited focus on him being a student. What I love about Spider-Man is the more grounded approach to this character, and realizing that he is a high school student in some films, and you have to approach him in a different way compared to, let's say, Captain America or Iron Man or Thor. You have to have a much smaller approach. And Far From Home tried to do a lot with it when you look at this character, and a lot of the cringy jokes were bad. I did like the aspect of him mourning the loss of Tony Stark, added that personal connection to the characters within the MCU. But overall, Spider-Man Far From Home, I really did not care much for it. Coming in number 19 is Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. This film, people really hate. I was surprised after seeing it the first time. Was it February? March, February? That this film came out and people absolutely hated it. I was really surprised. Going back and rewatching it a couple times since then, I get that. I understand why. I do like Kang in here. I like the performance from Jonathan Majors. Really intimidating. But then you look more at it, his intimidation and a lot of that suspense for that villain is swept away when you look at some of the other tones within here. Especially when you look at villains like MODOK and what they do with the ants and a lot of the initial setup for the story. It feels very different in tone compared to what Jonathan Majors is bringing to this movie. And what he does bring is very successful, very strong, very intimidating, a nice, strong setup for if they want to continue using this villain down the road, but everything else just feels very wonky within this movie. I do like the visuals, I do like some of the action, and testing Ant-Man as a character, returning to the quantum realm was very exciting to see, but overall the tones clash quite often. Coming in at number 18 is Thor Love and Thunder. This film is funny. Taika Waititi's typical flair, continuing from Ragnarok, is here within it. There's a lot of times where they have some strong moments for the character of Thor and development for him, emotional scenes, and then they kind of just rip that away with a comedic moment that at times has that nice transition, and at times it comes off as really frustrating. And that happens quite often within this movie, is that you're trying to feel invested in the relationship between Jane Foster and Thor and seeing that develop. You're trying to feel the intensity from Christian Bale as our villain. But then you get these jokes that Waititi throws in that feels out of place quite often within this movie. The soundtrack is really great. I love the Guardians in the beginning of the film. And you feel like at times Thor is trying to hide his feelings about what happened with Endgame and Jane Foster and covering that with jokes. And I get that vibe a few times with the performance from Chris Hemsworth, but I feel like it's just a little too much. Coming in number 17 is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. They really could have delivered more on the madness of the multiverse and more of different parallel worlds and having different versions of Doctor Strange, and that scene that I was so excited to see with John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic, and you had Charles Xavier in there. It was something that a lot of people were looking forward to, and so many theories going into it, and that just felt so wasted. And that's just how I feel with this film, is that at times it just feels wasted. Potential for this movie is very high, and it just did not meet my expectations. I did like seeing Wanda return with Doctor Strange and what she's going through after WandaVision. I thought was very successful, but there's so much more they could have done with this film. Coming in number 16 is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. This film will always be remembered for having the hardest task of bringing Black Panther back to the MCU after the loss of Chadwick Boseman. And you do feel that personal, emotional touch to this movie after the loss of Chadwick Boseman. You do feel that within here. The performances from all of the characters that are mourning the loss of Black Panther and what's going on with real life with Chadwick Boseman is very strong within this movie. exploring Namor's world under sea was very strong, something I was very interested in within this movie, and they do a great job of building that into Wakanda's storyline as well. With the hand that they were dealt with this movie, I think they did a great job of pulling off some of the action and exploring different characters with Namor and growing some of the characters that were already within the first film. Coming number 15 is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. This film has some really fun action in it. At times feels very average with its the third act of this movie, but Shang-Chi is a character that I really liked. It has this fun energy to it. A very personal story for him as well when you look at some of his past and where he is now and what he's feeling. Nice development for this character. Intense action, especially early on, exploring the 10 rings and their power as well. Something that there's more potential to do, and I hope that they start to bring in Shang-Chi again and explore this character, because right now I don't know any of other plans to have a sequel when you look at some of the movement of current MCU films going all the way to the end of 2025 without having Shang-Chi in it. You got to have a film soon to really still build off of this world. And Shang-Chi, likable character. Awkwafina is a lot of fun. Great jokes in here. Nice vibe to it. Overall, just a blast. Coming in number 14 is Iron Man, the first MCU film, much smaller compared to where we are now in the MCU, and it's still very successful in that term of building the character of Tony Stark. Robert Downey Jr. is so good as Tony Stark, one of the best castings in the MCU. Really just embodied what works for Tony Stark. Very snarky at times, very confident, believes in himself, and gets things done. And that's so fun within this film. A strong build up for him in the beginning that tests him very personally and his skills as a person, and then using that for good at the end is a nice transition for this character. Smaller action, smaller villain compared to where we are now, and just feels very personal for his story. Coming number 13 is Ant-Man. The first Ant-Man film, the heist feel to it works. It's more of a street level movie. It's not trying to do something big, trying to do things very small actually, but I do like Paul Rudd as Ant-Man. Fun, charismatic performance. Working well with Michael Douglas and Evangeline Lilly. There are a lot of fun moments in here. The heist aspect to it's really entertaining. Him learning about his abilities, using it for good, exploring all of that, the ants, the world that is set up within here. Just a really fun film. Coming number 12 is Black Panther. This film does a nice job of setting up the world of Wakanda. The ins and outs of it, the character dynamics, the routines, the world structure, does a fine job of building this world, and so interested in what's happening within it. And our villain, Killmonger, is one of the best villains in the MCU. The character that you understand his purpose and his motivation, his ideas about the world. It's a character that you can easily side with. Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther is so strong. That nice introduction in Civil War pays off with this movie. A lot of great action. The conflict between Black Panther and Killmonger and their past, very emotional, very personal connection to these characters. I was very impressed with Black Panther and how they initially set up the character in Civil War. Continued that within this film. The action, the world building, all of it is really good. Coming in at number 11 is Spider-Man Homecoming. The first Spider-Man film in the MCU had this odd task of not trying to do the same thing that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man or Andrew Garfield did. We already had the origin story, so how can you bring this character in without having an origin story? I thought they were very successful, continuing off of realizing that he is a high school student. It has to have a much smaller film. You're not trying to do something really big. I like Michael Keaton as Vulture, one of the best villains in the MCU. I like how they realized that he is that high school student, and it is very grounded. He wants to take on these big tasks, but he has to prove himself and stay focused on who he is. I like the vibe to it. It felt like a high school movie with Spider-Man in it. Rounding out the top 10, we have Avengers, the first big team up movie The story is not as strong as the first time I watched it, and it's much smaller compared to other movies, but that team up feel to it, people hate each other, there's some hot and cold relationships. It's not absolutely perfect. A really grand, fun end to this movie against Loki. And they were working to building up this Avenger team, and it does work. And you do feel that the relationships have to be explored, and there's going to be times that they test each other. I like that it wasn't all perfect, and they all work together so well, and they got the job done. They're going to test each other, and it feels realistic for a team. But I love this film. It's so fun. I remember watching it in theaters and being so hyped for these characters, and it's so crazy to where we are now. Coming in at number 9 is Guardians of the Galaxy. James Gunn brought these characters that not a lot of people knew about, and some people maybe weren't even that interested in them in the first place, but they took these misfit group of characters and gave you something to really love. Star-Lord and Drax and Gamora, Groot. Those characters are iconic to this day because of that first film and how fun it was. The vibe, the overall tone to this movie is lighthearted, entertaining, good action, group dynamics. They work well together. They hate each other at times. It's not perfect. They have to work through it, and bringing in these characters that not a lot of people knew about. James Gunn was very successful in that and brought characters that you cared about throughout the story. Strong storylines for them. A script that does work, has a really nice pace to it, and to this day, one of the coolest MCU films. Coming to number 8 is Thor Ragnarok. Talk about a complete switch up from Thor the Dark World and Thor, and bringing Taika Waititi into it. Completely different style to it. The color is brighter, the tone is different, it's funnier, it's more action packed, a stronger villain. Completely switch up the overall tone and take on Thor, and it paid off. Even if Thor Love and Thunder is not as good as Ragnarok, I still appreciate Taika Waititi coming in and doing something completely different for Thor, and it fully paid off. Hulk in here is a lot of fun. Hela as our villain was entertaining and very suspenseful and intimidating. The comedic route worked. It had that nice balance of emotion and comedy, and there was a great payoff as well. Challenging Thor and bringing Loki in here and fully realizing Loki as a character, that he's not so much more of a villain now. He's a character that's trying to do something good, and I really do appreciate that they still had Loki continue with the Loki show on Disney Plus, which just ended. Very good. But this is where we kind of see that transition for Loki, and Taika Waititi handled it so good. Coming in number 7 is Captain America, the First Avenger. To this day, I love this movie. I love the different feel to it, the different style of direction and color. Red Skull is a good villain. That motivation of doing good and proving himself is very strong within this movie. A lot of setup for the character, a little too much at times. Seeing him in the war and him trying to prove himself, and then him becoming Captain America, and that successful end to it was very strong. I like the different style to it. I like the setting and how the filmmaking kind of matched all of that, and it was very different from the MCU films we've gotten. To this day, it's very different from all of your kind of just average MCU films, but I love the connection, but I love the setup for Captain America, and to this day, my favorite MCU character. Coming in at number 6 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Talk about a great way to end the trilogy. Very emotional story that is all focused on Rocket Raccoon, and the characters caring so much for him that they go to these extreme lengths to protect him and save him. That makes this group feel so connected, and the love that they have for each other is so strong in here. Some of the best emotional moments in the MCU is within this film. Moments that you just feel like crying because of that connection these characters have. But also looking at Star-Lord and Gamora's relationship, and it's not the same again, and how much he loves her is also a strong minor story within here. Great soundtrack, once again, great action from James Gunn. Minor characters that do work. James Gunn just was able to bring these characters and have a fitting conclusion to the storyline. There may be a continuing story for some of them, but it's not going to be the same thing, and this was a great conclusion to that storyline. Coming at number 5 is Spider-Man No Way Home. This was a dream come true, having the different Spider-Man characters in here, something I never thought was going to happen, but having Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland all together was absolutely epic. But also bringing in the villains from previous Spider-Man films, they did it in a way that you feel like it could be clunky or overstuffed, but they did it in a very successful way. Very nice pace to it, introducing characters at the right time, realizing that some of them might not have the same development as others, but also looking at Tom Holland as a character and things that he has to go through. He has to prove himself. He is tested quite often in here. There is so much that is piling on top of this character, and it just adds for the nice development of Peter Parker. Coming in number 4 is Captain America, the Winter Soldier. This is a completely different feel to Captain America, having it be like a political thriller, watching the Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes in here, and that connection that he has, and he has to protect his friend. What that length that he will go through to protect his friend is something that adds so much to this character. The action is grittier than any MCU film I've seen. It's very tense with its script, and having Scarlett Johansson in here, having the Winter Soldier is a very intimidating villain, and there's a lot of suspense to it, but also you want to see that relationship explored and how it's tested, and seeing it change throughout. I love having Winter Soldier now, and he's good, but this film is so good with its political thriller feel, and the friendship that is tested for Captain Rod, and the friendship that is tested between Bucky Barnes and Steve Rogers is nicely explored within this movie. Coming at number 3 is Captain America Civil War. This was very thoughtful in its script. They were thinking of future installments and having these characters' ideas explored, and that it's different from other characters, and that is where a lot of the frustration for these characters, that conflict rises, and it's so strong in here. And a very earned ending of this movie with the Winter Soldier, Iron Man, and Captain America, and that great payoff. But the characters fighting against each other, it's natural to have that at this point in the MCU, and how it's connected to future movies as well. And as when you look at like Infinity War and Endgame, and the characters are separated because of this movie. Everything that's set up for like Spider-Man and Black Panther is because of this movie, and it's so thoughtful and strategic in its storytelling that you just can't help but feel connected to everything that goes on in this movie. Coming in at number 2 is Avengers Infinity War. People talk about Endgame and Infinity War a lot. My thoughts are not going to be that much different from everybody else's. Infinity War is so good. Having the characters separated in different parts of the world and outer space as well, you're going to have different styles of action, different characters, different threats, and Thanos is so good. I cannot express how good Thanos is as a villain. Intimidating, the right structure, the right structure and pace in writing to this villain makes it one of the best villains, not only in the MCU but in comic book movies as well. And so bringing the characters together, when they do eventually get together, you feel the importance, the urgency of Thanos, and the strong connection to this movie with looking at Civil War, and where characters are separated, and you have to put those differences aside to fight against Thanos, and is explored so well in here with seeing the characters that you love throughout the years all team up together, introductions, and a lot of comedic moments that absolutely do work. Infinity War to this day is one of the best MCU films and one of the more exciting installments in this franchise, and one of the best comic book movies as well. But coming in number 1 is Avengers Endgame, a crowd pleaser, a buildup of everything we got in the MCU. It's a payoff that works so well. Iron Man, his sacrifice, when you look at everything that happened in the MCU, people didn't believe that he could do people didn't believe that he would put his life on the line, and he did. A lot of emotional scenes, a lot of epic scenes, bringing the characters together, Captain America holding the hammer, and characters sacrificing their lives. It just writes these characters in a way that you care so much for them, and they care about themselves and their group as well, and the urgency of Thanos' story and the world, and it's so much bigger than who they are. Endgame realizes that so much within this film. It's long, it's epic, it's action packed, you just cheer through so many sequences, and I am afraid that we're not going to get that same feeling in the MCU moving forward. Maybe like a Secret Wars storyline, but Endgame did it so well, building up over all these films, so many of them, to where we got now the characters that you cared about. There's great payoff, action, emotional scenes, a lot of comedy throughout, but you'll feel that overall tone. It's very dark. There's not a lot of promise to it, but it ends up paying off and being one of the best films ever made. So there you guys have it, all 33 MCU films ranked worst to best. How would you rank them? Let me know in the comment section down below, and stay tuned for more up and coming content like this. My name is Justin Watches Movies, and you guys stay classy, YouTube.